Hey, welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving into a topic that doesn't get nearly enough attention, the mystery of Moses' sons. You've probably heard of Moses, right? He's the legendary figure who parted the Red Sea and led the Israelites out of Egypt. But what about his children, Gershom and Eliezer? Have you ever wondered why they don't show up in the Bible the same way Aaron's sons do? What happened to them? Did they just fade into the background? Or is there something deeper going on? In this video, we're uncovering their hidden legacy. We'll explore what the Bible says about their roles and why they didn't become prominent figures like their uncle Aaron's descendants. Their story isn't just fascinating, it also holds valuable lessons about God's timing, purpose, and the power of serving faithfully behind the scenes. If you've ever felt like your contributions are unnoticed, or like you're in the background while others take the spotlight, this episode is for you. Gershom and Eliezer's lives show us why being in the background can be just as meaningful in God's grand design. Stick around to discover surprising reasons why Moses' sons were overlooked, how their hidden legacy still influences us today, and what their story teaches us about fulfilling our unique roles in God's plan. If you enjoy uncovering hidden biblical truths and diving deep into Scripture, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others who love exploring the mysteries of the Bible. And don't forget to drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's grow together in wisdom. Let's start by going back to where it all began. The story of Gershom and Eliezer starts during Moses' time in Midian. This was a defining period in Moses' life. After fleeing Egypt to escape Pharaoh's wrath for killing an Egyptian taskmaster, Moses found refuge in the land of Midian. There he met Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, who was a Midianite priest. The two married, and during this time they had two sons, Gershom and Eliezer. The Bible first introduces us to Gershom in Exodus 2, verse 22, which says, Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land. Gershom's name comes from the Hebrew root word ger, which means sojourner or foreigner. This name reflects Moses' sense of displacement and alienation while living in Midian. Think about it. Moses had grown up in an Egyptian palace, surrounded by luxury and power as the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. But now he was a fugitive shepherding sheep in a foreign land. Gershom's name captures the deep sense of being an outsider, a stranger in an unfamiliar place, which mirrors Moses' personal and spiritual journey. Eliezer, Moses' second son, is mentioned later in Exodus 18, verse 3-4, which says, One son was named Gershom, for Moses said, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land, and the other was named Eliezer, for he said, My father's God was my helper, he saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. The name Eliezer means God is my help, serving as a testimony to God's protection over Moses when he fled Egypt. This name is not just about gratitude. It's a declaration of God's faithfulness and deliverance during one of the darkest times in Moses' life. While Gershom's name speaks to Moses' feelings of exile, Eliezer's name reminds us of God's saving hand. Together, their names tell a story of struggle and hope, a tension between the challenges Moses faced and the assurance of God's presence and help. But even though these sons were born during a significant chapter in Moses' life, their roles in the biblical narrative are surprisingly minimal. Unlike other prominent families in the Bible, like Aaron's for instance, Moses' sons didn't rise to positions of leadership or play major roles in the events of the Exodus. When God called Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt in Exodus 3, Gershom and Eliezer were still young children. Moses, hesitant and feeling unworthy of the monumental task ahead, set out for Egypt with his family in tow. Exodus 4 verse 20 describes this moment. So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and started back to Egypt, and he took the staff of God in his hand. This verse paints a picture of Moses as a father, balancing his divine mission with the responsibilities of leading a family. However, despite their presence early on, Gershom and Eliezer fade into the background as the Exodus story unfolds. One dramatic moment involving Moses' family does stand out, though. It's found in Exodus 4, verse 24-26. On their journey back to Egypt, the Lord confronted Moses in what seems like an intent to kill him. Zipporah, realizing the seriousness of the situation, quickly circumcised their son and touched Moses' feet with the foreskin, saying, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." This intense event highlights the importance of the covenant of circumcision, which God had first established with Abraham in Genesis 17, verse 10 to 14. Circumcision was a sign of being set apart as God's people, and Moses' neglect of this act nearly cost him his life. Zipporah's quick action not only saved Moses, but also ensured that the family was in alignment with God's covenant. This moment reveals something crucial. Even someone as chosen as Moses was not exempt from following God's commands. It also shows the quiet but vital role that Moses' family played in his divine mission, even if their contributions were not widely acknowledged. But why then did Gershom and Eliezer fade into obscurity? Several reasons could explain this. God's focus on Aaron's lineage. God specifically appointed Aaron and his descendants to serve as priests in Israel, a role of significant responsibility and visibility. Exodus 28 verse 1 to 3 details this calling, emphasizing that Aaron's sons were central to Israelite worship. This focus may have intentionally limited the prominence of Moses' sons to avoid confusion about spiritual leadership. Moses' unique calling. Moses' role as prophet and mediator was one of a kind. Deuteronomy 34 verse 10-12 highlights this uniqueness. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. This distinction didn't automatically pass to his children, as God's callings are individual and specific. Possible separation. During the Exodus, there's evidence that Gershom and Eliezer might not have been consistently present during key moments of the Exodus. Exodus 18 verse 1 to 6 describes a reunion where Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brings Zipporah and the boys to meet Moses at Mount Sinai. This suggests they may have returned to Midian for part of the journey, which could explain their limited involvement in the narrative. Although Gershom and Eliezer's roles were not as prominent as others, their descendants carried on their legacy. 1 Chronicles 23 verse 14 to 17 provides a brief genealogy, noting that Gershom and Eliezer's descendants served within the tribe of Levi. Gershom's line included Shubael, and Eliezer's included Rehabiah, whose descendants were described as numerous. While they didn't achieve the high status of Aaron's priestly line, they still played vital roles in maintaining Israel's worship and service to God. Let's take a closer look at the broader impact of Gershom and Eliezer's descendants within the Levite tribe. While they did not hold the high-profile priestly roles reserved for Aaron's lineage, their contributions were still meaningful in the context of Israel's worship and community organization. For instance, 1 Chronicles 23 verse 4-17 tells us that Moses' sons were counted as part of the Levites. The sons of Moses, the man of God, were counted as part of the tribe of Levi. The sons of Moses, Gershom and Eliezer. The descendants of Gershom, Shubael was the first. The descendants of Eliezer, Rehabiah was the first. Eliezer had no other sons, but the sons of Rehabiah were very numerous. This genealogy indicates that Gershom and Eliezer's descendants were included in the broader Levitical service, which was crucial to the functioning of Israel's worship system. The Levites were responsible for assisting the priests, caring for the tabernacle and later the temple, and overseeing the sanctuary's operations. This distinction is detailed in Numbers 3 verse 5-9, where God tells Moses, "Bring the tribe of Levi and present them to Aaron the priest to assist him. They are to perform duties for him and for the whole community at the tent of meeting by doing the work of the tabernacle. They are to take care of all the furnishings of the tent of meeting, fulfilling the obligations of the Israelites by doing the work of the tabernacle." While Aaron's descendants were tasked with the priestly duties of offering sacrifices and maintaining the holy rituals, the Levites served as their essential support system. Gershom and Eliezer's descendants fulfilled these roles faithfully, even though the Bible doesn't provide detailed accounts of their individual contributions. One notable figure from Gershom's lineage is Shubael, sometimes spelled Shebuel, mentioned in 1 Chronicles 23, verse 16, and later in 1 Chronicles 24, verse 20. These passages highlight Shubael as a leader among the Levites. As for the rest of the descendants of Levi, from the sons of Amram, Shubael, from the sons of Shubael, Jehdeiah. This recognition indicates that Gershom's line held a place of leadership within the broader Levite structure, even though they were not part of the priesthood. Eliezer's line, on the other hand, is noted for its numerical strength. 1 Chronicles 23 verse 17 emphasizes that the sons of Rehabiah were very numerous. This detail may seem minor at first glance, but it speaks to the blessing of fruitfulness on Eliezer's family. In a time when family size often reflected God's favor, the growth of Rehabiah's descendants demonstrated that Eliezer's legacy endured and expanded within the Levite tribe. This proliferation of Eliezer's line stands in contrast to other family lines in Israel that diminished over time. It echoes God's promise to Abraham in Genesis 22 verse 17, where he said, "I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore." Though not celebrated like Aaron's line, the descendants of Gershom and Eliezer played vital roles in preserving Israel's worship practices, fulfilling supportive and administrative duties that allowed the priesthood to function effectively. This deliberate distinction between Aaron's descendants and Moses' descendants underscores an important truth about God's design. Not every calling is meant to be the same. Aaron's line was specifically chosen for the priesthood, with all the privileges and responsibilities that came with it. Gershom and Eliezer's descendants, on the other hand, were called to serve in the broader Levitical structure. This is further emphasized in 1 Chronicles 24 verse 1-2, which describes the divisions of Aaron's descendants. The sons of Aaron were Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. But Nadab and Abihu died before their father did, and they had no sons. So Eleazar and Ithamar served as the priests. By contrast, Moses' descendants are only briefly mentioned in this chapter, reinforcing the distinction between the priestly line of Aaron and the supportive roles filled by the rest of the Levites. This separation highlights that God's callings are unique, intentional, and not necessarily tied to human expectations of inheritance or prominence. Even though Gershom and Eliezer did not hold leadership positions or achieve the same level of recognition as Aaron's sons, their legacy still carries valuable lessons for us today. Their lives show us that God's plan for each of us is unique. While some are called to be leaders in the spotlight, others are called to serve faithfully in the background. Both roles are equally important in the unfolding of God's purposes. The descendants of Gershom and Eliezer remind us that the impact of faithfulness often extends far beyond what we can see in our own lifetimes. Although their contributions weren't celebrated in the same way as Aaron's family, they were essential to the spiritual life and worship of Israel. This principle is echoed in Psalm 112, verse 1-2, which says, "Blessed are those who fear the Lord, who find great delight in his commands. Their children will be mighty in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed." This passage reminds us that a life lived in obedience to God leaves a legacy that can bless future generations. Gershom and Eliezer's descendants, though not famous, were part of the fabric of Israel's worship community, quietly contributing to the continuity and stability of their faith. Their story underscores the truth that God values obedience and faithfulness far more than human recognition. The story of Moses' sons also challenges us to rethink how we define significance. In a world that often equates importance with visibility and status, Gershom and Eliezer's lives remind us that God's perspective is different. 1 Samuel 16 verse 7 tells us, "The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Gershom and Eliezer lived in the shadow of a legendary father, but their lives and the lives of their descendants mattered deeply to God. They fulfilled the roles they were given, and their contributions were woven into God's greater plan for Israel. This serves as a reminder to all of us that our value in God's eyes isn't based on how much recognition we receive, but on how faithfully we follow His call. For anyone who has ever felt overlooked or unimportant, the story of Gershom and Eliezer offers encouragement. It shows us that God sees every act of service, no matter how small or unnoticed it may seem. Hebrews 6:10 assures us, "God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown Him as you have helped His people and continue to help them." The story of Gershom and Eliezer teaches us that not everyone is called to stand in the spotlight, and that's perfectly fine. In fact, it's often in the quieter, behind-the-scenes roles that God's purpose is revealed in ways that transcend human understanding. While Moses' sons didn't rise to fame like their father or even their uncle Aaron, their contributions were still part of God's plan. This reminds us that God's design for each of us is unique, and every role, no matter how small it seems, has meaning. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1 captures this beautifully. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. Gershom and Eliezer lived in a time and place where their roles were not intended to be prominent. Instead, they served faithfully within the purpose God assigned to them, even if their contributions were not widely recognized in the biblical narrative. Similarly, Romans 8 verse 28 assures us, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." Just as God worked through Gershom and Eliezer in ways that weren't immediately visible, He continues to work through us in ways we may not fully understand. The lack of recognition in their story doesn't diminish their value. It actually highlights how God often uses the unnoticed and overlooked to fulfill His larger plans. Their story also shows us that the seeds of faithfulness we plant today can bear fruit for generations to come. Gershom and Eliezer's descendants became part of the Levites, contributing to the worship and spiritual life of Israel. Though they didn't achieve the prominence of Aaron's priestly line, their legacy endured. Psalm 112 verse 1-2 reminds us of this enduring impact. "Blessed are those who fear the Lord, who find great delight in His commands. Their children will be mighty in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed." Gershom and Eliezer's descendants, though not in the spotlight, were part of the tribe that served God faithfully, helping to maintain the spiritual foundation of the Israelite community. This brings us to an important lesson. The value of what we do in God's service isn't determined by how visible or celebrated it is. Hebrews 6:10 says, "God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown Him as you have helped His people and continue to help them." Gershom and Eliezer's descendants carried out their duties faithfully, and while their names didn't make the headlines of biblical history, their contributions were not forgotten by God. Their story speaks to those of us who may feel unnoticed or undervalued. In a world that often equates significance with fame or status, Gershom and Eliezer remind us that true fulfillment comes from obedience to God's calling, not from human recognition. The humility of Gershom and Eliezer's lives stands in stark contrast to the culture of ambition and self-promotion we see today. Philippians 2 verse 3-4 challenges us to adopt a similar mindset. "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others." Gershom and Eliezer's story is a testament to this principle. They didn't seek prominence or position, but fulfilled their roles quietly and faithfully. Their lives challenge us to focus less on gaining recognition and more on serving God and others with humility. In 1 Samuel 16 verse 7, we're reminded of God's perspective on what truly matters. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. God valued Gershom and Eliezer not for their visibility, but for their faithfulness. And the same is true for us today. Even when our contributions go unseen by others, God sees them, and they are significant in His eyes. For those of us who feel like we're in the background, working hard without recognition, Gershom and Eliezer's lives encourage us to embrace the roles God has given us. Their legacy shows us that no act of faithfulness is too small to matter in God's kingdom. Moses' life itself reinforces this idea. While he was undeniably one of the greatest leaders in biblical history, he still experienced moments of obscurity, doubt, and difficulty. Similarly, his sons didn't rise to fame, but their lives were still significant in God's plan. Gershom and Eliezer's story teaches us to value obedience to God over the pursuit of recognition. In the same way, Philippians 2 verse 5-7 reminds us to follow the example of Christ, who made Himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. Like Jesus, Gershom and Eliezer humbly served in their appointed roles, teaching us the importance of selflessness and submission to God's will. Their lives also challenge us to shift our focus from human praise to God's approval. This perspective allows us to find peace and purpose in the roles we're given, no matter how small or unnoticed they may seem. The story of Gershom and Eliezer reminds us that what matters most isn't the size of our role, but our faithfulness in fulfilling it. In conclusion, Gershom and Eliezer may seem like minor characters in the Bible, but their story carries profound lessons for us today. Their lives remind us that God's purposes are often hidden from human eyes, but are no less significant. Their absence from the biblical spotlight is not a sign of insignificance, but a testament to God's unique plan for each of His people. Whether we're called to serve in the foreground or the background, every role matters in God's kingdom. Gershom and Eliezer's story encourages us to trust God's greater plan, knowing that our faithfulness, however small it seems, is valuable and meaningful to Him. So where did the sons of Moses go? While they may not have stood out in the biblical narrative, their legacy reminds us that God's purposes transcend human recognition. Their descendants faithfully served in the Levite tribe, contributing to the worship and spiritual life of Israel. Their story invites us to reflect on our own lives. Are we seeking recognition, or are we content to serve where God has placed us? Gershom and Eliezer challenge us to embrace humility, trust in God's plan, and find purpose in the roles we've been given. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the hidden legacy of Gershom and Eliezer. If you enjoyed this exploration, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others who love uncovering the deeper truths of Scripture. Let's continue to learn and grow together. God bless, and we'll see you next time.